All right, let's go bring in former Notre Dame quarterback, Irish legend Brady Quinn to the show. Brady, really appreciate you joining us to talk some Notre Dame football recruiting and all things really Notre Dame football, but definitely want to start with the quarterback of the class, the Fighting Irish signing, four-star Kenny Minchey from the Nashville area, All-American quarterback, someone I know you're familiar with, Brady, and watching his tape. Just, when you watch his film, what do you think the Irish are getting here, Brady?
Well, one, a very, polished passer, extremely accurate. Some of the downfield throws, as you see right there. A guy who I think could really operate well within Tommy Rees's offense. But he's also some escapability, some kind of that creativity that you need to extend plays and make plays now in today's game. It's so much more of a spread out game, and you've got to have the ability to improvise at times and throw under duress. But there's another example of just the kind of the downfield throwing game, which he seems to excel at, at least at the high school level, and we'll see how that transfers into the college level. But again, a guy who I think, you go back, you watch these kids nowadays come out of high school, and Ghouls, I'll be curious to see what your thoughts are. They're so much more prepared than I was. I go back and sometimes see some of the tape. I'm like, gosh, I was so raw. I needed more, coaching and technique and fundamentals and things. And these kids just come ready to play. I mean, like the last thing you're really concerned about is their fundamentals, their throwing motion, like any of that. It actually now is because of the way spread offenses are taught at the high school level, and that is pretty much what dominates a lot of these high school offenses. It's more teaching them football. It's like teaching them like verbiage. It's teaching them fronts and coverages and all those things, and maybe even how to read stuff differently than what they were taught previously. So it's almost more of the mental approach to the game than it is the actual physical.
Brady, when you were coming out, did you have a quarterback coach or anything like that at the high school level?
Yeah, so I worked with an old Ohio State quarterback, Greg Fry, if you remember the name. And he had ended up taking a head coaching job at, I believe, Bexley around the time that I was entering into college. But I'd worked with him probably starting in junior high and then making my way up into the college ranks in the high school. The tough thing for me was I was a pitcher, I was a catcher, I was a quarterback. So you kind of had this variety of throwing motions that you were trying to kind of, I guess, technically tune up about, half the year. Obviously your pitching motion is incredibly different than anything else you do with a football. You're throwing as a catcher is much more similar to what you're going to be asked to do as a quarterback. But once I started to get 6'3", 6'4", had long legs, man, it got hard on my knees. And I was just like, I'd rather play pitch outfield, DH when I get the opportunity. So it was helpful, but even at that time, some of these kids have specialized now to the point where when they're in elementary school, they're getting that sort of tutelage early on, and they've got that motion ironed out by the time they hit high school.
Yeah, it's funny you mention your long legs. Long legs. I can remember going back to you were under center with Johnny Sullivan.
Oh man,
you're ass to grass trying to get that snap. But
that's because he had the shortest legs for anyone who's 6'3" in the history of the world. I mean, I will never forget.
Oh sure, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, if he was like 200 yards away from you, he looked like a small man. Like he looked like he wasn't 6'3" because of how short his legs were and long his torso. And then as he walked up towards you, like, oh, this is a big human being. But I'll never forget, that was the first thing I think Charlie Weiss did when he got there. He was like, Sullivan, you got to change your stance. You got to stop squatting down so low. You're going to have to get your butt up. So
yes,
that helped me a ton.
What we used to call him, the world's tallest little person.
Yes, I believe at one point that was mentioned in the locker room at some point.
Yeah, but I mentioned the quarterbacks coaching because it's like, I'm 40 years old, Brady, right? So I came out 20 plus years ago, and that era of quarterbacking, you wanted that statuesque, kind of that beautiful fluid throwing motion. And anymore, and you mentioned kind of that escapability, that aspect of modern football.
Yeah.
Like if you're statuesque in that pocket, I mean, you almost can't play the position anymore. It's like teach the kid the fundamentals of coverages and reads, and then let that athletic ability take over. And I think you see a lot of that with Minchey.
Well, even the different arm angles and off-platform throws. I mean, those are things that are now taught. I mean, I recall working on a 3, 5, 7-step drop, understanding how to throw with timing and anticipation in certain routes. Nowadays, you're looking at guys who don't even have their feet set. And they're making throws like right here, for example, kind of drifting and throwing downfield, almost across his body. I mean, those are things these young men practice now and they're taught. And by the way, I'm not saying that, I'm not a proponent of that. I think when you practice some of that, then it doesn't become foreign in a game, and you realize like, oh, I can do this if the situation calls for it. So I'm all for it. That's kind of being a gamer, being a player. And I think a lot of, what's being required or asked of the quarterbacks at this level now has a lot to do with, again, the game being more spread out. But honestly, a lot of times just the fact that the offensive line isn't able to hold up quite as well. I mean, the athletes across from you on defense are so much better and faster than they've ever been that I think offensive linemen are at a huge disadvantage. And especially when 80% of the time they're moving lateral or backwards instead of downfield, and they're not being as offensive as they should be and running the football like they used to back in the day. Which is one of honestly the differences I think you see at Notre Dame, right? With the way they try to run the football and how Harry Houston and Tommy Rees like to implement the ground game, is bring back that physicality and teach those guys how to prepare for the NFL. And it's one of the reasons why I think you look at a guy like Kenny Minchey and you go, why is Notre Dame an easy sell as a quarterback? Because we run an NFL style system. You're going to be prepared to play in the NFL as you go through Notre Dame, aside from the education and everything else that comes along with that.
Sure. Yeah, I think so much of it comes down to, like you had said, I mean, there is no platform to throw off of. And some of this comes down to God-given gifts. Like, you've got to have that live arm to throw off that back foot. But yeah, Brady, building off the quarterback position, were you quite a 5-star coming out of high school? I mean, you were up there, right?
I was
okay, high 4-star, we'll call it. What is it with Notre Dame, being X number of years removed from the program? What is it about us in recruiting the quarterback position? Maybe it was a Brian Kelly era thing. Why haven't we, through your purview, like, why haven't we been able to land a Dante Moore type high 5-star, just elite quarterback? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a number of things, right? Like, you have to be looking for the right combination of things as a quarterback. Everyone values different things. For me, it was football at the highest level, education, all those things. I do think Kenny Minchey's a kid who obviously values that. You look at guys like CJ Carr, who's committed for the 2024 class, right? A Michigan man, his grandfather recruited me at Michigan. He sees the value in Notre Dame and everything else that comes along with that. He's a stud, right? Both these guys. So it just takes, maybe a different approach to it, where what you see with how Marcus is recruiting Kenny or how he's recruiting CJ, as the head coach, as compared to what was done before with Brian Kelly. I mean, the things that seemed to circulate was the fact that, he wouldn't have been out there like Marcus Freeman's been right after the season ends, in between bowl game and all that, out there recruiting his tail off, seeing every single commitment, every single guy. That just wasn't something that he was going to do or even did. So, there's a big difference there, I think, when you have that personal connection as a head coach with your quarterback, because you are the two that are really ultimately going to either make or break or handle the adversity that comes along with being the quarterback and being the head coach of Notre Dame. It's really those two positions that seem to get the most attention and focus. So, I can't speak for what happened and why not over Brian Kelly's time there. I have the utmost respect for Tommy Rees and his scheme and how he is able to scheme to get guys open and find ways of maximizing the strengths of a lot of the guys on the roster. It's something where, I get to go to the combine as part of my work that I do for Fox and CBS. And, you talk to some of the coaches there in those circles, and they love Tommy. They love Notre Dame guys, especially you talk about offensive guys who are coached the right way, are in the right system that they can immediately plug in and play, and they know what to expect. So, I think for any quarterback out there, you'd want to look at Notre Dame and say, this is going to prepare me in every facet, playing in bad weather, playing in some of the toughest competition and independent schedule, all of that. And the national focus and attention. I mean, this is no disrespect to the Cleveland Browns, but I remember getting to Cleveland and thinking, like, this is the NFL, but I felt like my press conference during the week at Notre Dame were bigger, at least in more of a national perspective as far as the attention we got.
Yeah, in your era, no doubt. How do you look at college football now? Is there a part of you that looks at it through the lens of a player, or have you completely moved over to the dark side and you look at it through the lens of the media?
I look at it as, I have to professionally look at it through the lens of the media. I do look at it as through the lens of a father. That's what I am now. I look at it through the lens of an almost 40-year-old man, right? I'm 38 years old now. And I think I look back on all of my experience as a player who got to the NFL and played for, going into 8 seasons and, getting into all of that. I kind of look back on it now with a perspective of valuing, I think, what Notre Dame stands for after football more than ever. And I think the older I get, the more I appreciate that. As a parent, the more I appreciate that. I get to travel to different college campuses every single week for my job at Fox with Big Noon Kickoff. And, you get to see a lot of pretty places, a lot of special places, different schools, and they have different ways of doing it. And I always think back on my time in Notre Dame and think it's so unique, it's so different, it's so special in comparison to everywhere else I've been. So I look at it from that perspective. I think the problem is right now we're operating college football like a professional sport, but we don't want to acknowledge that, especially now with NIL, especially with the transfer portal, which to me, creating 2 windows, that's a step in the right direction. But being able to have the ability to transfer in an unlimited capacity is absurd. I mean, JT Daniels is going to be on his 4th school now playing at Rice. I mean, with the additional year of eligibility from COVID that some of these guys had, it really is ridiculous to think that there is just no more true commitment. It seems like it's a year by year thing. And I think it's going to test which programs have the most culture and have the best foundation built to be able to not be enticed to want to go to the portal every single year to recruit a roster. Because you're bringing in, some guys who obviously want to be there and play there, but by and large, maybe for the wrong reasons. And so I just look at where we're at, and I think we need more framework. I hate the fact that the NCAA, who now has at least tabbed their next president, is going to look to the federal government to figure it out. It's like, okay, that's fine. But once you create law, then you're going to create lawsuits, right? Because with that, people are going to challenge whatever law is created. And so it just becomes more convoluted. It becomes more difficult to really figure out that path. But I do think from the player's standpoint, it's a step in the right direction. Name, image, and likeness is something that, everyone's been taken advantage of for a long time at the college football level. And it's sad that the NCAA, unfortunately, didn't have the foresight and the leadership to see this coming and do a better job of preparing everyone for, I think, where we're headed in the next 5, maybe 10 years.
Brady, I really wanted to get into the NIL. So through your perspective, kind of twofold question. When NIL was created, Brady, what was it supposed to be? And then beyond that, what has it turned into?
Yeah, I think the initial thought to NIL was more along the lines of what you see with Olympic athletes. And this is something that I've gotten a chance to know pretty well. My wife obviously was in the 2008 Olympics, and she originally was competing at Brown University before she ended up coming back out of retirement to go train for the Olympics. So it's for that 2008 Olympics. And you kind of look at the Olympic model and you say, well, why were these individuals not able to profit off their name, image, and likeness for marketing money, but yet still compete at the collegiate level, even though they're representing our country? Like it really never made any sense. And for some of them, like Jeremy Bloom, who I got close to back during my time training in the NFL, and when we were both playing in the NFL, he was like, dude, I couldn't afford to be an Olympic mogul skier and a world championship mogul skier and not take some of these dollars. Like skiing's expensive. And by the way, gymnastics is expensive. They'll pay for your athlete to go over. They'll maybe even help out with the parents, but the parents don't even get paid for. Like they have to pay their own way. So imagine some of these trips where they're competing in Beijing or they're over, somewhere in Europe. And this is happening every year. It's an expense that's hard for a lot of parents to endure. And so I think that was the initial intent, to be able to help student athletes, take advantage of the platform that they've created for themselves and make some additional capital. I think what the problem is, it's not NIL, it's the transfer portal. And it's the fact that we don't have a governing body and we don't have any rules in place to, limit tampering, right? Where you have coaches who are, for example, offering a player on a roster after a game $1 million to come over and play for that school. That kind of stuff is going on right now, and it's nuts. And it's because these coaches feel emboldened because what's the recourse? There is no
Wild, Wild West. It's Wild, Wild West. So hypothetical, Brady, you knock off Pittsburgh, right? Pittsburgh's coach comes over to you. Hey, Brady, great game. Hey, by the way, we got $1 million waiting for you. Brady, what does that mean? When they say, $1 million, Peyton Bowen's getting $2 million, step by step logistically, as much as you can say or is comfortable saying, what does that mean?
It means absolutely nothing. Okay. Like I can assuredly tell you, it means absolutely nothing. Go ask Jordan Addison if he was happy last year when he got to USC and what was promised to him and what ended up being the case.
Got it.
That's one player in particular that I think it's interesting that current events right now with Pat Narduzzi being very open about Drake May, who's not his quarterback, right? Drake May, the quarterback in North Carolina, has been offered $5 million from a couple of teams that he's making very aware. You kind of sit back and wonder, well, who are those teams? Like, who's losing a quarterback to eligibility or the NFL draft that would maybe be looking to lure over a quarterback who's going to be the first or second pick in the 2024 draft in Drake May? Wonder who that could be. And look, I'm not saying it's necessarily the football programs. It could be the collectives that are tied into that. The problem is just there's no real checks and balances as to how to limit that stuff or eliminate that. And by the way, I'm not naive enough to say that doesn't happen to the NFL level. We talked about the combine earlier. You get agents who walk around all the time that have to go talk to a team. Oh, guess what? A guy who's going to be a free agent coming up happens to be in Indianapolis, because, St. Elmo's is a great steakhouse. We all know that. That cocktail sauce, boy, it's hot. Just so happens to bump into his agent who happens to be talking to a team that might be interested in him in free agency, right? Like, it happens in the NFL all the time. It's very rarely caught, and they have rules in place to really penalize you if you do get caught. You'd like to see that stuff in the college football world, but it's just going to be so hard to govern. I mean, you're talking about, thousands of student athletes and hundreds, if not thousands of coaches that could be potentially doing this at any point in time. And there's all types of different ways they're doing it. So to go back to the initial question, what does it mean? Absolutely nothing. For some of these collectives, they're probably, at least from what I understand, they're offering these kids guarantees, illegal. They're offering these kids signing bonuses, illegal. They're offering them opportunities to earn money off their NIL, which there's nothing wrong with that. But how it's stated within the NCAA guidance is you have to do the work in order to get paid. And if you're getting a signing bonus or even an advance payment, that's not how this is structured. Mm-hmm. So the other wiggle room or way around it that some is happening out there with some places is, agencies are signing up these kids and they're giving an advancement. And then they're kind of backloading in some of these, other deals or corporate sponsorship and NIL deals they're finding for them after the fact, just to entice them to be a part of it. And that's something that's, supposed to be forbidden even at the NFL level, but, in the recruitment for draft prospects. But again, that stuff's been going on for a while now. It's just trickling down to the college football level. So, I'm not saying that you can't necessarily pay a kid that. You just have to be able to have it structured in the proper way that abides by the NCAA guidance as well as the state law until there's federal law.
And it's got to be enforced, yes.
Well, I mean, you've got to have your checks and balances for it. Like, you've got to have your compliance. You've got to be paying taxes on that money. That's one of the things too, is like a lot of these young men don't understand. When someone offers you $1 million, $2 million, guess what? You cut that in half. You're now in the top tax bracket. Say hello to the federal government. So that's one thing too that I think is kind of misunderstood in all of this is just the educational piece to this, not only for the player but their parents as well.
Naturally,
and I think the three letters that should be more important to these young men than NIL is NFL, and that's really where they're going to make life-changing, generational-changing money. Not with NIL money. Like, that's not going to change their life. That's just going to make them comfortable. That's going to help out their family or whatever issues they're doing and allow them to be able to, make some money off of that at the college level. But some of the valuations you see out there online are wildly overvalued, thrown around, I think, for more clickbait and to serve whatever entity that is, whether it's a website or something else, to serve their best interest.
Got it. We got you for a few more minutes. So we're coming to you on signing day. If you were to give like your average, a top 300 player, Brady, coming out, Uncle Brady, what would your advice be to a kid coming out and when he's trying to make in the gold rush kind of NIL era? What's your advice?
I'd be wary, and this is no different than when I was being recruited, right? Like, the thing that attracted me, or one of the things that kind of sold me on Notre Dame, outside of the education and the feeling when I got there and all that, was Tyrone Willingham was honest with me. He didn't guarantee me anything. The only thing he said to me was, the only guarantee I'll ever make to you is you'll have a chance to compete to start. And I was like, man, that's the most honest thing anyone said to me this entire process. And I felt like, he built that trust with me. I think that's one thing that Marcus has been doing with a lot of the guys he's recruited. He's building that trust. He's not blowing hot air. He's not offering them a bag full of money, all this stuff. Like, none of that's being thrown out there. I think it's real. It's genuine. It's one of the reasons why the team was so excited when they hired him. So, my advice to, and it's not just the players, it's the parents out there. It's, prioritize, what you want most, not what you want right now. And so what you want most is for your kid to have a chance to go play in the NFL, to be developed to go play in the NFL, have a chance for them to win a national championship, have a chance for them to be able to receive a top of the line education. Notre Dame does all those things. And then also, if you excel, if you succeed, you're going to be able to make a lot of money off NIL at Notre Dame. There's nowhere like Notre Dame. There's nowhere with the national exposure. So all those things are going to be out there for you as well. But that really can't be the driving force, in my opinion. And I think if it is, then you're going to find yourself potentially back in the transfer portal. You're not going to be able to build up that foundation to rely on later on in life. And, an alumni network, a group of friends, like all those things, that support system that I think you're going to need, whether you go on and have a successful career in the NFL or not. That's way more important. It's hard to put a value on that, but it's way more important than I think anyone understands.
Brady, last thing before we get you out of here, what have you seen from Marcus Freeman on the recruiting trail? Large part of him being hired was because of the recruiter he is. What have you thought in his first full cycle so far?
He's present. I mean, really, he's present. He's out there. He's showing face. You see him like time and time again. He's in living rooms left and right. I sit there and just marvel at, the ability to do that. Obviously, just coming off of a season, preparing for a bowl game, having all of that, yet you're still out there recruiting, having these conversations, getting to know these young men who are eventually going to come play for you. Not everyone can say they're able to do that, the same way he is. In fact, I don't think we could say that with our previous head coach. So, the way he's been able to do it, to me, has been the most, impactful thing. Like, there's no more valuable asset on this planet than time. And he's taking time away from his family, away from everything else, to spend it with these recruits and show them how much he cares.
All right. That's former Notre Dame quarterback Brady Quinn. Really appreciate you joining the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Go Irish.